Welcome to Donuts, Design, and Debate, the show where we discuss and you decide whether or how many, sorry, I didn't, should have known this, but I'm just going off the top of my dome here. Anyways, how many donuts a particular design deserves. That's it. Still got it. We've been on a little hiatus. Anyways, we're back. Yes, this is a very special episode. You guys are tuned in for a great one because we have our first guest on the show today. So I'll be sort of moderating, Aaron will be debating, and our guest will be debating as well. So what are we going to be debating? The topic today is retro rebranding. So I'm going to give you a little background on that, and then we'll introduce our two debaters. So, of course, what is a brand? Begin at the beginning. What is a brand? Brands, of course, are how people, consumers, interact with companies, right? It's sort of a promise of what you're going to experience when you commit your money or whatever it is to the company. So brand is more than just like the logo or the colors, but it's also kind of the identity of a company, sort of the associations or connotations you have with a particular brand, the emotions, the positioning of the company. This all lends itself to what is identified as brand. Of course, companies exist over time, and so brands sort of evolve over time. Sometimes towards the future, but sometimes brands might say, "Hey, maybe let's go back. Let's do a throwback," right? A retro, which of course I did a lot of research for this, and retro comes from retrograde. And in relation to like fashion and stuff, this is early 70s was the first use of this retro, talking about sort of a design, going back to a previous design. Brands like Coca-Cola, Kodak, Pepsi have all done, it's two soda pop brands, but all kinds of brands have done this, sort of going back to Burger King, great example that I thought up right now. These brands that have like a sort of an established brand, but then they go back to a previously established brand. And is that good or bad? Stick around and vote, and we'll hear your side of the story. Also, real quick, sports teams do this kind of thing too. I saw it first done as turn back the clock night in baseball. This is like, now the throwback jerseys where people will use jerseys from like previous eras and stuff. But this turn back the clock night I thought was interesting because it's like some teams would do this where they would turn off the electric scoreboard, the PA system, and just have like hand loudspeakers and just do the score the old-fashioned way and stuff. So going back to the old days kind of thing. So anyways, let's bring on our debaters to talk about whether this retro rebranding is good design or not. So first up is my co-host. You know him from previous episodes, Mr. Aaron Dietzen. Hello, Aaron. How are you doing today?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Sure. Yeah, as I stumble through this intro, I'm happy to have somebody else to talk to. So
you stumbled great. I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah. And like I said, our first guest, a guest of honor on the show today, is a professor at University of Colorado Boulder, and his name is Danny Rankin. Please welcome him.
Yes, man, I'm glad to be here. It's always, I love that Aaron's like, thanks for having me, even though I'm also the co-host of the show.
Yeah, he's happy to be back. Oh yeah,
he's back in the saddle again. Like Matt said, we took some time off. It's been a couple months since we've done this, so it's good.
Yeah,
season 2.
Yeah,
that's right.
Back on the bike. It's just like riding a bike. Bicycle. Cool. So I guess we get right into it, right?
Let's introduce our guest.
Yes.
Matt's excited. Let's do this thing. Go. I personally, first I want to just say, Danny, thanks for coming on. This is, we're pretty excited to have, I like that we started let's not just get another guy on here to get a different point of view. Let's go find a professor. Let's go find somebody whose job it is to actually know about the stuff we're talking about. Oh, and then let's have him go against Aaron.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here to argue with you about stuff. I professionally argue all the time to a room full of people that don't normally care. So it's exciting to be in a room full of people that maybe care slightly more, which is exciting. No, I shouldn't say that if my students are cool, but yeah, no, it's good to be here. And I'm excited to get to talk about this stuff. So.
Yeah. So what's your background? What do you teach? What's your interest in design? Where does design come into your life?
Yeah. So I'm a teacher. I teach graphic design, I teach game design, and I teach sort of like hands-on fabrication and material creation at this place called the Atlas Institute, which is this really cool interdisciplinary space within the University of Colorado's College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. So it's like CU Boulder and then engineering and then Atlas, which is inside of that. And it's all about sort of cross-disciplinary research and radical creativity and invention, and a lot of really amazing people that do just phenomenal stuff there. And I started many years ago. I went through programs there as a student, went to grad school there, and then I teach there now. And it's an amazing place because I get to kind of go, I'm fascinated by this area of design, and then I get to teach about it, which is pretty fun. Because before that, I worked at Apple retail and taught software and technology there, and kind of pivoted after grad school to working in higher ed. And I also have a background in graphic design and game design. I've developed and designed board games and video games and stuff too. But I love teaching and talking about design, and it's just a big passion for me. So that's pretty much my spiel thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. Follow wherever your curiosity leads you. It sounds like so. That's pretty sweet. All right, cool. Well, that's a great bit of background on your expertise, your knowledge in the design field. And Aaron, we don't have to ask you about your background in design because there it is.
Just here again. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, let's jump into the debate portion of the show. So of course, our pro argument is going to go first. So is retro rebranding good design? Yes, that is falling on Aaron's shoulders. So he will be starting our debate. So we'll have a couple minutes for opening arguments. And let's get into it. So what do you got for us today, Aaron?
All right. Well, so let's talk about this. So we are talking about logos. We're talking about identities. The first thing, and I just want to lay this out there because we're both going to be talking about it. A logo is an identity. It's the face of a company or a brand. It is how people identify, and it should stand on its own. It should speak. There's a lot of things that go into logo design. I'm sure Danny will probably touch on some of them also. But one of the things that's important is, like I said, it is like a face. So when you see a logo, you should identify, oh, that is this brand. It's, companies don't have actual physical faces like we do. So it's kind of the face that what represents that portion of the company when you see it. A good logo should actually elicit some sort of feeling when you look at it too. So we've all seen those logos where there's like the letters of the name of the company are together, and if you look at it right, it looks like two people hugging, and that gives you a sense of security. Or some companies will use big, strong letters in their logo, showing that they're strong, strength, that kind of thing. That's something that happens, and it's not on accident. A good logo designer will create a logo so that it does embody some sort of feeling when you look at it. That's good. Where does retro rebranding come into that? Well, I'm glad I asked. So by bringing back an existing logo that people already know and they've already seen, it's an easy way to create some emotion or some feeling. If you see a logo that comes back that you've seen in your past, it will inevitably trigger some sort of emotional response. You see the old Burger King logo that was the logo that was up, when you went there in high school, that was the logo they used, and now they're bringing it back. Immediately, you have that emotional response. You know it's Burger King, you see it, and you have some sort of response to it. Obviously, there's a couple arguments that, well, what if somebody's too young to not remember the rebrand? Well, then for them, it's just a new logo, and it doesn't really matter. And then the big question that, as I was going through this, I'm like, well, what happens if that triggers a negative response? What if I look at it and I'm like, well, remember that time I got so sick at that restaurant? Well, guess what? it's not the logo's fault. The logo doesn't have to provide something that the brand. All the logo has to do is trigger a memory of that brand. So it's kind of the brand or the company that makes sure that those responses are good, but the logo itself is still doing a good job. And I'll argue that a rebranded logo that brings back a negative memory is still doing its job. So generally speaking, a logo, they say, should be redesigned or refreshed every 5 to 7 years, something like that. That's a lot of redesign. That has to happen. That's a lot. So sometimes you'll see companies, they'll do minor changes. They'll change a color. Sorry, I just got called out as they. Who's they? I don't know. I think they is design professors primarily are the ones who set these rules. But so generally speaking, companies will refresh their logos. Thank you for catching that. Every 5 to 7 years or so. A lot of times they will do minor adjustments. Everybody's seen the Apple logo. If you look at the history of the Apple logo, a lot of times it stayed the same, but like it'll change colors or it'll get a different finish on it. Slight changes. When you see a throwback logo, it's potentially going back to something drastically different. Maybe a big overhaul that happened at some point in the history of the logo, and it goes back to something from years back. The advantage to using a throwback logo or a retro rebrand in that case is you're making potentially a significant change, but it still feels familiar. So you get the advantage of basically years of history in the logo rebrand without being so shocking and jarring and having it be something totally different or unrecognizable. So rebranding with an existing logo is kind of a shortcut that our brains as consumers accept when we see that. So it's actually, I would maybe argue, quicker and easier and more accepted to take an old logo and show it rather than putting something brand new out there. We'll talk a little bit about how this applies to the our design principles as we get into voting. But overall, I have to say that I am pro retro rebrand for all those reasons.
Hey, nice. Very good opening argument. We appreciate that from all the angles. So yeah, Danny, what's your opinion on retro rebranding?
Yeah, so I don't want to come out and immediately just say that I'm like against retro rebranding. When we talk about what a logo is or does, I think that Aaron is right on, right? The whole idea is that it invokes some sort of recognition response. And to me, whenever a brand wants to represent itself in media, choosing a symbol to do that is, important more now than it has been in the past. I would say that actually back in the day, people had logos and nobody really thought about it. They were just like, oh, it's a logo. And now people literally will spend time and breath and energy debating it on a podcast because they feel like it's important, right? And people will break apart a logo that gets released online and everybody's like, oh, this is such a terrible thing, or it's so wonderful. And I mean, I have to acknowledge just initially, there's a certain amount of privilege embodied with the idea of being like, yeah, we can just hang out and argue about this thing that somebody spent a bunch of time making or creating. There's this guy back in the middle of the 20th century, I'm going to go like academic on this thing just for a second. There's this guy, Roland Barthes. He's what we call a semiotician. It's the study of signs and symbols. And he talked about the idea of what it means for something to be understood in culture. So like in the way that like if I wave to somebody on the street or I flip somebody off while I'm driving down the road, those are signs that don't actually mean anything in their inherent essence, but they actually have something carried along with them that everybody understands because they've seen it. And people are trying to do that with logos because they're trying to be like, okay, well, when people see this logo over and over and over again, and they drink this Coca-Cola every single time they see it, right? We want them to have this same association, right? We want them to have this like, oh, I don't have to have somebody tell me like, great taste or classic kind of vibes or what it is. They just see the color and the style of it, and they immediately know what's happening, right? And that's what, brands desire. And like Aaron said, sometimes brands end up with bad identities, and I would argue that a lot of the reason that companies rebrand is because they want to try and wash away the stink of any sort of like bad memories that are there. So one of the problems that I see with retro rebranding is that, yeah, you're necessarily entering into this like, maybe a minefield of people's previous associations of something, But, that aside, that's not my primary issue with it. My primary issue with it is that in that same sense, the semiotic kind of sense, somebody uses a logo and they gain a bunch of traction with it. Let's take the classic Burger King logo. And the reason that I'm skeptical of it is because when I saw it, I was like, it's like a warm hug. I'm being hugged by the Burger King logo. And then I went, why do I feel emotionally manipulated by Burger King right now? Like, why am I being warm hugged by Burger King? That doesn't seem like something that should be happening. And my alarm bells went off. I was like, hold on a second, what are they trying to do to me here? And I would say that what they're doing, and this is probably my biggest issue with it, is trying to, I would call it nostalgia mining. They're strip mining my youthful nostalgia for the sake of trying to sell more hamburgers, right? Which I'm not trying to be overly cynical, but I'm not immediately just enamored with the idea of like, oh, cool, I guess I've been brainwashed with the idea that when I see the classic Burger King logo, I'll forget about all the ugly history of fast food and factory farming and industrial food production, and I'll just go back to the time when I just ate a salty hamburger as a kid and it was the best thing ever. But I would say that knowing graphic designers and logo designers, yeah, they are trying to tap into those kind of core primal emotions. And that's both a powerful thing about design, but we have to be careful because it can be almost irresponsible to do that. And the other part of it that's problematic is that when you do that, every time you use a symbol and then reuse it in culture, you functionally reduce or recycle its meaning. So this guy that I mentioned, Roland Barthes, he's a semiotician in the middle of the 20th century, talks about what he calls cultural myths. And that's where something gets really understood by people as far as what it means, and then it changes meaning. And then the next time that it's used, it has another layer of meaning that's been attached to it, right? So when we think about retro rebranding, every time something gets pulled out of like the old cabinet and recycled, it's not what it was when it was first refreshed. It's that thing with all of the other layers of meaning, good and bad, stacked on top of it. And if you continuously do that, you're doing so to diminishing returns. So for a designer, it maybe is almost like, it's kind of like a shortcut, yes, to getting your emotional impact that you want. But you're almost screwing designers down the road who might want to be able to use that, because every time now, if Burger King does something stupid, you've now attached even new things to the retro rebrand. And every time that happens, we sort of like, scrape away a little more youthful idealism of a culture and leave behind just cynicism with people's association between symbols and capitalism. So for me, it's a mixture of laziness and a lack of thinking long-term about what a brand can mean, just for the sake of sort of like grabbing a hold of emotional manipulation for a particular generation of people. And that's why I would say that resolutely I have a problem when I'm the con against retro rebrands.
Brilliant. Oh, wait, let me get my ding sound effect going. Nice, beautiful. Well structured argument all around. So, yeah, I think I'll let you guys just go head to head, rebut each other. And yeah, what do you think about each other's, what did you say?
I just got to give props to emotional strip mining. I thought that was
yeah, that's
thoroughly
I worked on that one. Yeah, that's definitely one. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it feels like it sometimes, right? And I'm not saying you're wrong about the idea of like brands need to do that. I just worry about that sort of like, are we just, digging into people's good feelings for the sake of like quick commercial returns, so that then somebody later can just rebrand again, and not paying attention to like, what are we doing to sort of the broader idea of what this company is for? And maybe people don't care, but yeah.
Well, I mean, does that seem any weirder than anything else companies do? I mean, isn't the goal in, I don't know, business now, get ahead as quick as you can, as far as you can, however you can?
Yeah, and that's
this is, by the way,
is it
this is the meanest I get when we're talking about going back and forth is asking a question.
Oh, dude, no, I'm not going to attack your. Hurt. I think, yeah, you could say, is design supposed to be this like crystal chalice that doesn't actually have values it imposes, but rather just amplifies and holds on to values that are put into it? And if we're using Dieter Rams, you could kind of like say that he would argue either one, depending on kind of era and timeline or whatever, that like, no, design is just supposed to take whatever's put into it and amplify that in a way that embodies this. But at the same time, that's impossible, right? We can't separate what we want to be true about society from what it is that we do. And the values that we have are going to be, whether we consciously say like, no, we're just trying to make money or whatever, there's a part of us that are probably a little bit bummed out about this idea, right? And once again, I'm not saying I don't want to say that, like, I'm undercutting my argument a little bit. I don't want to say that retro rebranding is not useful, because like I think it does fire off certain like serotonin in the brain. But from this perspective of like, no, maybe design should embody a bigger cultural ethic, which is kind of how I like to think about it. Not just like design's just a tool and we go like, yeah, well, we designed better bombs to kill people, or we designed better branding to kill people's pocketbooks. But actually, like, design can be and hopefully should be a tool that helps us make the world a better place. And yeah, there's room to debate what that means, but I don't want to say that design is just this neutral implement that just reflects a certain cultural goal. Every designer has a role to play in that, and every designer gets to choose, like, oh, am I going to mine someone's childhood nostalgia for Ninja Turtles and relaunch this Ninja Turtles campaign at a Pizza Hut, or am I going to sort of, and maybe the damage is done, right? Maybe we were just like, well, we can't escape from it. But the part of me that wants to fight cynicism with idealism says, no, we can do better. We can think about what that means. Or, yeah, the deep kind of anti-capitalist part of me is just sort of like, I don't know, burn all the brands to the ground. We don't need brands. Brands are stupid. So who knows?
It kind of sounds like you just said that with design power comes great responsibility. Like you have to, not just go in and find the color that makes people the hungriest, but actually, think about the impact that your work is going to have, rather than just how much money can you get from it.
The question of like, do brands kill people or do people kill people? Right? Like, I think that there's definitely an edge to that. To your point, right? You could suggest that, from a utilitarian kind of standpoint, brands just need to do what they need to do, and maybe we shouldn't worry so much about them, or designers shouldn't get into that. But like, why do we exist as people if not to try and like see our values lived out in the world and to make the world, more in line with what we want to see to be true? And it maybe is, once again, overly idealistic of me, but I want to say, like, I would love to live in a world where designers go, no, we actually really want the world to be better, and we're not just trying to like pump stuff out there for quick returns. It's hard to escape the system we live in, but maybe if enough people were skeptical of that, they could avoid it. This whole time in my stomach, though, I'm just like, gosh, you've called to mind Retro Burger King, and I mentioned Retro Pizza Hut, which Pizza Hut just did the same thing, like not that long ago. They switched from their like kind of swirly, very early 2000s, kind of like very emblematic of this, like, it's the new millennium design. And then they were like, actually, the new millennium sucks. Let's go back to the old version of Pizza Hut when we just went to these little restaurants with weird roofs and we stuck that on top of our logo type and people ate pizza and everything was fine. And the other part of it that's wrong is like, actually, you can't just pretend that we don't live in the era we live in by slapping an old Pizza Hut logo over our current reality. Like, you have to acknowledge that, like, reality is what it is. And that's my other problem with nostalgia is it's like, you can't pretend reality is not reality just by eating at a Pizza Hut. And I feel like that's a little bit of what people are saying, but who knows?
But I can pretend reality is not reality just while I eat the pizza. Like, I feel like that's okay.
I mean, yeah, and that's Pizza Hut is going to be like, you know what? Out there's climate change and there's political turmoil and there's disaster around the world, but in here there's a personal pan pizza and book it in a dimly lit salad bar covered in germs.
Just like when I was growing up.
That's right. A simpler time, better time. That's what people want. Just bring it back to the germs. Anyways, so that's great. Let's get to the real meat of the argument. Speaking of food, we're going to get into the donut voting portion. So, of course, these will be taking our 5 principles of design, and you in the live chat get to vote on whether or not you think this deserves a donut, which is good design. So, the first one we have is retro rebranding useful? And our producer Aubrey will be putting the poll up. So I'll have you guys go head to head on this as I enjoy some donut.
I mean, yeah, I want to say, I get that it's useful, but it's not infinitely useful, right? You can't just keep making it useful. That's my, what do you think?
I mean, I got to say that I mean, it even feels like a shortcut, right? Because you're taking something that you already know works. So as a logo designer, I feel like it's less work to rebrand, but useful. It's immediately useful because you're using something that's already proven. You don't have to go in and go, does this logo embody my brand? Because yeah, it already did, and it did for 7 years. So you're done. Yeah, but it's doing what the logo needs to do. I'm having a real
hard time arguing against that. Like, I'm kind of like, yeah, I would say it's useful. Just like I'm a designer, I'm lazy. You know, somebody comes to me, they're like, you have 2 days to think of something for this. I'm like, oh man, here's a useful trick. So I don't even want to say that it's like a hard for me to even like. I'm in the con camp and I have to argue against all of these. But I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Is cheating on a test useful for passing a test? Yeah.
When you get down to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think the audience has spoken on that one. It is useful. So one donut going to retro rebranding. Okay. So, yes, our next question, our next poll, our next donut up for debate is, does retro rebranding have aesthetic appeal? What do you guys think?
All right, I'll hop in here and say, kind of along the lines of the useful thing, aesthetics is when you look at something, because we talk about design being functional and aesthetically appealing, satisfying. I don't know. Does it function and does it look good? And again, I'm just going to go to, if you're dropping back to an older logo, there's probably a concept in there where it is aesthetically pleasing. Like there's something about it that looks good. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't jump back to it. So I would say generally, if you're going to jump to an old logo, it's because it is aesthetically satisfying or pleasing.
I would argue that while yes, at the time maybe it was, the notion of aesthetics and culture changes over time, and aesthetics has to do with sort of like, usability and visibility and all the things that you sort of are like, is this good design, right? Which is sort of this like protected walled garden of it. And I would say actually maybe what you're trying to do is redefine what's good aesthetic by recycling something that's worked in the past. So you're in essence not trying to adapt to what functionally works in the eyes of people now, but you're trying to redefine it. So even though maybe certain people will like that aesthetic, I think that the argument against it being like aesthetically pleasing is like, once again, I see the Pizza Hut logo and I'm like, Pizza Hut logo, right? But just from sort of, if we're trying to be this like neutral design arbiter kind of thing, there's no reason to apply that aesthetic in the current era except for it to call back to an emotional thing. So that from a objective design standard, there's nothing inherently aesthetically good about a retro rebrand. Some of them might be good because they embodied good design principles. Some of them might be bad, but we just like them because they make us feel good. In the same way that, like, at a certain point, we talked about this like a little while back, like when we first talked, like synthesizers in music. You know, I grew up thinking 80s music sucked, and now I'm like, I love synthesizers, all the synthesizers. I want all the 80s music in my life, right? And I worry that retro rebranding suffers from the same thing, like aesthetic being too ephemeral and too immediate in culture in the moment, and then like 5 years from now, we're gonna be like, oh gosh, why did we go back to the dumb Pizza Hut logo, right? I don't think there's anything essentially aesthetically true about it, but you know, I'd be interested to see what people think. It looks like people voted yeah. There's not that many people voting. Come on, people vote. Vote, you people. Don't make me vote. Don't make me vote no to make this tie.
Yeah, get in there. Get in the. You gotta hop in the poll, folks. But yeah, so that is another one for for yes. The donut goes to retro rebranding on this one. So that's 2 donuts in the bag. The next topic we're going to talk about, and I'll go to you first on this one, Danny, is retro rebranding simple?
No, I will say no because it's my job to say no. Like retro branding is, like I mentioned, layering more meaning on top of itself every time that we come back to it. So although it harkens to a simpler time, theoretically through nostalgia, it's not functionally simple because actually what you're doing is capturing years and years of history of something and hopefully bringing them to the forefront. So they're giving the illusion of simplicity, right? They're saying like, yeah, this is just back when all we put in a Coke was just sugar and cocaine, and then they're trying to get us to think like, oh, I guess that's fine, but we're ignoring this. So in a certain sense, we're like almost muting all of these things that have happened or that we've thought about and trying to call to it, but I don't think they're inherently simple, right? At the end of the day, and also depending on how far back you go, some retro rebrands are just complicated and ugly, right? Like if you look at like, somebody should just Google while they're sitting here, the Throwback Mountain Dew can. Nobody's going to argue that that's like a simple visual aesthetic. They're going to be like, oh, why is there this weird little elf on this can? Yeah.
I always crack up. I used Apple as an example earlier. And if you go look at like the original Apple logo, it's got like these scrolls and script and an apple tree, and it's nuts. And then they dumbed it down to
Newton. It has the Newton quote. It's like a mind forever voyaging through unknown or whatever. Yeah, and it's got Newton under a tree that has woodcut and like I talk about it in my class, and I just love that logo. I'm like, imagine a computer with that on there.
This is what we need to go back to.
I know we're totally off here, but it cracks me up to think that like at the time that Apple was started, there's no way that their computer could have actually made that logo. You know, like that's way too complicated for what was capable at the time. It was totally a hand-drawn logo.
Somebody like carved that into the wood of the casing that they were building the original Apple in. Yeah.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
I was say, as for the simple argument, I got to say something here. So I'll say I find it's simple in that it's a way to cut corners. It's a way to go back and go, I'm going to do less work to get this logo out and taking what's there before. That's a weak argument, but that's what I got.
Well, the audience agrees with you, and no donut for you on simplicity. So just sitting at 2 right now. The next thing we're going to talk about here is retro rebranding environmentally friendly? Aaron, what do you think?
I think I speak for Danny and myself when I go, All right, here's my argument. I'm going to make
be like, yeah. Go.
Here's my thought. By reusing a logo that's been used before, there's less likelihood that designers are going to be scratching on paper and then putting that paper into the garbage. So it's helping the environment by reusing existing logos.
I literally was thinking the same thing. I was like, yeah, if I had to argue for this, I'd be like, less time on the computer is less electricity, and that's less environmental destruction.
I don't know.
I'm on the counterpoint since I have to make a counterpoint. Yeah. I would say that convincing people that we live in a time when environmental destruction is not rampant and needs to be rapidly addressed by making them sort of think that actually we live in this classical little time where everything is fine is functionally tricking people into going back to like throwing their garbage out the window of their car instead of like trying to recycle goods or whatever. So like, I don't love this argument either, but I would just say that it's sort of like, yeah, we need to get people in the. I'm not the doom and gloom guy. My undergrad is environmental studies, and literally I started going back into so like, just to give you, this is also off the rails a little bit, but like, I was in the military out of high school. I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I'll join the military. I did that. I got out of the military. I started working at Apple. I started teaching stuff, and but the whole time that I was working at Apple and teaching, I was also working as a graphic designer. I come from a background of graphic designers. My parents were both designers and sign makers. So I've been doing that for a long time in my life, and I was like, no, I'm going to save the environment. And then I went to school to like save the environment, and then I got so bummed out learning about all the things that are happening in the world that I was like, I think I'm just going to go back to graphic design, which I'm not saying that people should do, but like, it's not I don't love being the guy that's like, yeah, we're all screwed. We all need to get going. But at the same time, I don't think it's right for brands to just try and pretend, right? I get that we're all stressed out and that life is really hard. There are good ways to optimistically approach that other than just pretending that we're back in the 80s or 90s or something like that. So I would say that it's not environmentally sustainable because it promotes a mindset that's not. Even if, yeah, maybe the designer used a few a little bit less kilowatt hours in their computer because they could just copy and paste it from an earlier era.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, good points all, and the audience agrees with you. So no donut on environmentally friendly. So we're still sitting at 2 donuts for retro rebranding. Right. And keep in mind, folks, this is the last donut here we have. So don't forget to get out and vote because your vote matters. Your vote counts. So, of course, last one is retro rebranding honest. Danny, kick it off.
I mean, I think I've already kind of like nailed into that one where I'm like, no, you're trying to trick people into thinking that they're kids again. So yeah, I feel pretty good about that one. I'm like, yeah, no, retro rebranding is at best a little naive and at worst emotionally manipulative, right? And either way, there's something that needs to be acknowledged, right? Maybe there's versions of it that are good, right? Because it's like I'm thinking about like a retro Pepsi, and a retro Pepsi being like, we use real sugar. But I'm like, wait, why did you stop doing that? And why is that something you have to talk about? So it's at a certain point, we're talking about like advertising right now. We're like, is advertising honest? And I don't know like who's going to make that argument. But yeah, I want to hear Aaron do it.
All right, what you got? I will tell you exactly why it's honest. I just want to prepare everybody. If you accidentally already voted no, you can change your vote. It is possible to do that. So just a heads up. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to tell you exactly why retro branding is honest. It is honest because it is stepping back. It is going back to the core values of a product, a brand, or a company. It's going back to what it was before the world became cynical and the world is all about money. This is going back, like this is exactly what we were talking about. This is going back to when we had missions. We had a reason. We had a brand that we wanted to do something and change the world. We're stepping back to the creation of a thing, not the cynicism and the marketing it is now. This is stepping back to a better, cleaner time where, yeah, we were more honest about what something was supposed to be. So I would say that retro rebrand is a step back, and it is about as honest as you can get when you talk about a logo.
You sound like a commercial, Aaron. You sound like a commercial for a brand right now.
He's a spokesman. All right, looks like we got a tie on that one. So a half donut.
Right.
Half donut. So retro rebranding. Drum roll, please. You already listened to it. You know it has got 2.5 donuts. 2.5 donuts.
I mean, I'm satisfied with that result. That's about how I feel. In real life. I'm like, yeah, I both love this, and I also hate it. Yeah, I love it and hate it, and it's okay that it exists. So, yeah, that feels like a satisfactory outcome for this thing.
Yeah, right in the middle. Got to live with it. So, whatever. Might as well enjoy your donut while you're doing it. Or your pizza.
I'm ready for lunch now. I think it's time to wrap this up and go grab a burger.
All we've talked about is food brands. We didn't even get into the sports jersey thing, which I think is a totally different argument because that's like, like somebody mentioned in the chat, like a power move to show that, Amy said, a power move to show you've been around a long time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it is for sports teams too. It's either like, remember back when we were a championship team? Let's wear those jerseys and see if we can win again. But also for like classic era baseball teams, right? It's like, no, baseball has historical precedent and we're calling back to this thing that like, it ties us back to generations past. And I'm not against that in some ways. I think nostalgia can be powerful if it reminds us who we are, or it helps us remember that people have been people a long time. But I'm just skeptical of it, mostly with like food and beverage. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what you get when you record a podcast like it during the lunch hour is we both went to food.
Yeah.
We're like, we could have talked about any logos. We picked food logos.
Yeah.
So be it.
All right. Cool. Well, it's food time. Dig in. So, thanks everybody for listening. Do you guys have any closing thoughts? Danny, do you have any plugs or anything?
Not really. I mean, I know. I'm like, that's the thing. I'm like in academia, so I'm like, I don't know, register for my classes. I will just say that, like, if anybody is interested, my boss will be super pumped if I say the Atlas Institute has undergraduate, graduate, and PhD programs in creative technologies and design, and it's a super cool place if you're like, I'm both creative and an engineer, and I want to like go to school and both like learn how to get better at technology, but also, sort of embrace, arts, creativity, and critical thinking in ways that make my work applicable. Atlas is a super cool home for misfits. So you can check that out, atlas.colorado.edu. Super good place to come hang out and make weird stuff with us. So yeah, I'll pitch that.
Brilliant. Awesome. Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, check it out, folks. And for me, Aaron, our producer, Aubrey, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
I like this dance sequence, man.
Gotta do it. This has been a Trimble Media production. Thanks for listening to Donuts, Design, and Debate. If you have an opinion about our topic today, or if you have an idea for a future debate, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at donuts@trimble.com. Don't forget to rate and review the show. It really helps us out. Thanks again for tuning in, and take care.